Hello, my name is Dr. Glen, and for the past several years I've had a very keen interest in the internal combustion engine. It seems as though over the past 100 years the potential for the top half of the engine has been maxed out. However, the bottom half of the engine, the potential seems to remain untapped. Over the last 4 to 5 years I've been developing a prototype in my garage that allows for variable compression ratio as well as variable torque angle to some degree. What you're about to see is a demonstration of that model in action. Okay, this is the primary crank over here on this side. And watch it as I crank it through. That's the primary crankshaft. And I've stopped it at top dead center now. This is the secondary crankshaft. I'll crank it through. Okay, I think what I want to show you is I'm just going to rotate it through the strokes here. And you watch the piston, and you can, if you look real close right here, you can see the variation in the travel of the piston and the height of the piston. So if I turn this internal shaft, this small shaft through the center, the control shaft, the piston will move very slightly, but you watch it. Just turning the control shaft. Control shaft is now 180 degrees from top dead center. At this point, it's top dead center. At this position here with these handles, I've indexed it to where when both handles are this direction, then the piston, secondary to both crankshafts, is at top dead center. Okay? So if I hold the big crankshaft stationary, I'm going to do that with this handle over here, and then I'm going to turn the small crank, secondary crank 180 degrees with this handle here. Now the piston starts moving down. Okay, now it's at 180 degrees rotation here, and it's started to go down. I'm going to bring it on up to 360 degrees. Now see, it's still traveling down, and now it should be at bottom dead center. Okay, so it takes a whole rotation of this internal shaft to move the piston from the top dead center position to the bottom dead center. So I'm going to bring it back up now. There's 180 degrees, and here's a full 360 degrees. Now it's at top dead center again. So I'll rotate it through its motion now. See, there's down, up, down, up. That's the position of that's where the increased compression comes from. Down and up. Takes a full rotation of the internal shaft to make it go from top dead center to bottom dead center. Secondary crank is I'm going to rotate it, and watch this action right here. So you can see the secondary crankshaft working on this off-center circle on the primary crank. This off-center circle, as it comes up on the primary crank, and then the piston rises. So this should be like top dead center, bottom dead center, top dead center, bottom dead center, top dead center, bottom dead center. Okay. That's actually the secondary crank. Watch the primary crank as it rotates. And that's your major action on your piston, is when your primary crank rotates. Now, notice carefully here the position of the piston. When I hold the secondary crank stationary, watch the piston go down, and notice its position right here at top dead center. Both of them are top dead center. I'm going to rotate it one round, 360 degrees, and notice that the piston at top dead center position will be further down in the cylinder than it is at bottom dead, than it is at the 720 degrees rotation. See, now that's top dead center. And see where the piston is? It doesn't come up any higher. Now on the next rotation, it'll come back to the previous top dead center position. And you can watch that. It's low compression, high compression. Low compression, high compression. Okay? And that's beneficial because you can more completely purge the exhaust gases on the exhaust stroke with the piston in this position. And now it comes up with a heavy load of fuel in it and has a power stroke here with low compression, minimal engine knock or engine damage. It comes down on your power stroke, then it comes back up. Total purge of the exhaust system. Okay, exhaust gases, and you just, it depends on where you set your head in relationship to the cylinder here as to what compression ratio you want. If you want to run it at 10 to 1, we arbitrarily would say at this point, if we set the head right on here, let's call this 10 to 1. Okay, so and this is going to be an exhaust stroke. Okay. Now, when it comes up on the next stroke, compression, this will be a power stroke. Compression would probably be 7 to 1, 8 to 1, whatever you want it, relative to the head. It fires, comes back up on the exhaust stroke, and it totally purges the cylinder and the head of the exhaust gases. You have to modify your piston and your valve structure such that it allows the piston to come within just a few millimeters of the actual head so that it purges those gases. Conventional engines can't do that because they're limited to by their compression ratio. I mean, if it's 10 to 1 or 15 to 1, well, it never is that, but if it's 10 to 1 or 11 to 1, 12 to 1, it never goes higher than that, the piston, so it can never purge more exhaust gases than that. But in this case, as it rotates up on the exhaust stroke, which would be this one right here, you could have this, if you measure your compression ratio at this point, you could have this be, say, even though it's on the exhaust stroke, the position of the piston could be at a compression ratio of probably 30 to 1. For a more complete purging of the exhaust gases. And yet, when this comes around and comes up on your power stroke, you could have your compression ratio probably 8 to 1, something in that nature. Now, as you move this secondary crank over here, it moves your piston. Watch it move it very slightly there. See the piston move very slightly? So you can set this, and in any given position, and your piston will retrace the exact position that it has here now on a 720 degree cycle. So if I set it in this position, if you watch that piston now, it'll retrace. Now it's come up to actually top dead center on it's purging the exhaust right now, but it hasn't purged quite as much as if this was over here. See the piston come up, bring it over here, it goes back down. So we've actually dropped this a little bit, but in response to that, when we come up on the next stroke, or the next cycle, the piston rises higher than it did before. Now before it rose to that position. See how low it is? But now it rose to that position. And if you watch that real close, you'll see that cylinder or that piston change. Okay, from this position to this position. And that's the position it's repeating each time now. If this secondary crank is in is stationary in this position. Now if I want to bring it even further back like this, now you notice there won't be any difference from exhaust to intake. See, piston's right there. Right, like that, okay. Piston's in that position, piston's same position. Because this now is 180 degrees off center. These lobes are at the 90-degree position, and no matter what you do with this, on the bottom of the stroke, top of the stroke, it's the same, because this this rod journal is arcing this way rather than this way. In any position off of that, then it adds position, or adds length to the stroke of the piston, either on the top or the bottom or both, right? So that's basically how it works. Another attribute is you can actually just stroke the engine, okay? If you put these two, if you lock these two shafts together, this large shaft and this small shaft, and I'll show you those in a minute when we break it down. If you lock them together, it actually makes the crankshaft just like a solid crankshaft. And with the attribute of having this throw, the secondary throw, either out or in the distance of this secondary stroke. So you can either add or take that away from your primary crank. And if you lock it in position, then it's always in that position, and you change your compression ratio, but it's not variable at that point. But you've changed your stroke from, say, a 3-inch stroke to a 3.5-inch stroke, or 3 3/4, or if you want to make this dimension on this primary or the secondary crankshaft throw maybe a 1/16 of an inch, then you only change it 1/8 of an inch. If you want to make this say a 1/4 of an inch or a 1/3 of an inch, then you can stroke the engine 2/3 of an inch, bottom and top. And that would be if you'd have the throws maxed out. And I'll show you that. Let's put it on top dead center on both cranks now. That's this one and this one. And let's rotate them both through, same rate. Now look at bottom dead center. Cylinder's way down in the piston's way down in the cylinder. And we bring it back up, both of them, and it's way back to the top where it should be. But let's bring it 180 degrees or 360 degrees out of that relationship. Now if we rotate it, the piston travels not nearly as far. It goes from top dead center there, and bottom dead center is there. We have lost the distance of this stroke on the top and the distance of this stroke on the bottom. And now your engine has been de-stroked by the distance of this secondary throw on this engine. So the engine has been de-stroked by the distance of the secondary throw on this secondary crank. I call it a primary crank, the big crank that goes through. The secondary crank, or the control crank, operates this mechanism here, and that's the amount that you can either stroke or de-stroke the engine, whatever the throw is on that secondary crank. So you can stroke or de-stroke your engine by twice what this stroke is here. Whatever it is there, you can add that, take that away from the top and take it away from the bottom, or you can add it to the top or add it to the bottom. And that's how much you can stroke or de-stroke your engine. Okay, on the secondary crankshaft, I'm going to rotate the secondary crank with the dial indicator on it now. And when the dial indicator stops moving, it'll be away from the piston then. So you can see the travel of the dial indicator now as I rotate this down. And that'll give you the stroke when it stops moving there. That's the stroke of your secondary crank, okay? from 70, there's 1 revolution, 2 revolutions, 3 revolutions. It's about 0.32 inches is about what it is, okay? And that's the distance of this throw on this secondary crank, okay? Now the primary crank, I don't have enough stroke on my dial indicator to go the full distance of a primary crank, but let me run it up to top dead center again, roughly. Now the primary crank, see how quick it goes down? And you could follow it down if you had an indicator here, those like had an 1 3/4 stroke or a 2-inch stroke. You could just watch it and the variation on it. But see that, now the second round of the piston, when this comes up, see it only moved that dial indicator about 40 hundredths, 40 thousandths. Now watch it on the next round, see how far it moves it. It's going to move it 320 thousandths. In the next round, it'll move it 40 thousandths again. $320, 40, 320. So that's the variation in your 720-degree cycle. You have from one stroke to the next, you have a difference of about, well, 320 thousandths. So you can actually, with this structure here, these measurements, you could purge your exhaust gases on the exhaust stroke. You could raise your piston 320 thousandths higher than you do on the power stroke. If you go back over center with this, then you can increase your compression. You know, by the same token, you can take your compression stroke up to, say, 14 to 1, 15 to 1, 18 to 1, probably 20 to 1, depending on what this stroke is here. And your exhaust stroke, your purging would drop a little bit, okay, but your compression would go up. So there's an optimum that you could find there for the type of engine that you're working with, whether you have a low compression, medium compression, high compression, range, okay, not necessarily just the compression itself, but the range of compression you want to run. Say if you want to run it from 8 to 1 to 15 to 1, or you want to run it from 9 to 1 to 18 to 1, or 10 to 1 to 20 to 1, you can find that range, or predetermine that range, and that's where you make your head, you mount your head to your block or to your cylinder wall so that you've got that range, okay? So, and the range will increase or decrease with the stroke of the secondary crank. You can make it where you can actually have, instead of 320 thousandths, you could make this stroke here 500 thousandths, a half an inch, and then you'd have a half an inch to work with, or 500 thousandths, up and down. So you might want to set this, in that case, at 300 thousandths instead of 500 thousandths, and you'd use the bottom half of your one stroke and the top half of the other stroke, and your mechanisms to direct this down here may never go 720 degrees. It may go 150 degrees one direction and 240 degrees the other direction, your step motor that runs this crank, or this crank here. And that way you can run your compression and your purging mechanism wherever you want it. Okay. Let's just turn the engine through. Let's turn the secondary crank with this little battery-powered drill here, and you can watch this, and you can watch the piston and such. Now, remember the primary crank. Well, it may turn because I don't have any mechanism to hold it. If I hold it by hand, it won't. So. Kind of hard on dial indicators.
Fantastic. All right.
Oh.
Right?
Okay, now this is 180 degrees out now, but this is 90 degrees out. This is 360 degrees out, and this is 180 out.
Okay.
So we can do 180 on this one, will give us 90 out here. Okay, and that'll give us close to, whenever I get at 90, then our stroke here will be the same. It's pretty close. Now we go a full 180 out. Yeah, 180 out here, 360 degrees out here. It's the same indication on your dial indicator, but you're now 180 degrees out of phase. And if you can kind of understand that if you think about it. So I can run this 360 degrees, and this will be the same, but it'll be 180 degrees out of phase. And when you're talking about your engine is a 720 degree cycle, the 4-stroke engine, then you just move a phase up or phase back, or you move from the intake to the power stroke of the cylinder, and that makes your difference. So you move it down 360 degrees, so you change basically change one whole stroke, and you move into the next cycle, the next 2 cycles, from the previous 2 cycles to the next 2 cycles, and it works that way. So you can adjust it wherever you want it, and I'll do that a little bit here. So Run it into the next cycle. Bring it back into the previous cycle. Changing your amount of your stroke. Change the amount of the stroke there. Now you're full 720 degrees out of phase, or into the next 720 degrees out of phase, or into the next 4 strokes. And it's just a timing and indexing mechanism, or computers that can do that. This shaft right here is 3/4 inch shaft, goes all the way through, and this is the same shaft right over here. It's a solid shaft, okay, and that's our control shaft, okay. And it controls the secondary crankshaft, which is these gears, these sort of elliptical gears, or outer round gears. They're not elliptical, they're outer round, okay. Now the primary crankshaft is this 1 inch shaft here, and it's a hollow tube, okay. You can have it any size, you know. I mean, if you had a real engine, you'd probably have it about a 2 or 2 1/4 inch shaft here, and it could be hollow. This one could be hollow also, you know, for weight problems. And you can have the inside shaft is like a bearing all the way through this outside shaft. So you've got support on the inside and the outside. Now the outside of the secondary shaft, it's where your main bearings fit, okay? So that, like, this is a main bearing, this is a main bearing. You can put a main bearing here. Put a main bearing on every throw if you want to. And since these are straight shafts, they should have very little flex, okay? And so with minimal flex, if any, your main bearings can be tighter, okay? And they won't have to have allowances for the flex in the cranks, so you can have a better fit and a better surface, and this should last longer. The cranks, both cranks having lots of bearing surface. Almost anything on the crank can be a bearing surface, inside or outside, except for the throws. And the throws are kind of neat because they sit on top of each other, you know, and the throws have major bearings in them. Okay, like this, the inside of this is the rod. This is what the rod hooks to here. Well, all of the inside of this can be a bearing surface, and it's big enough that that you can have it a roller bearing surface, and with minimal friction there. But anyway, you have tremendous bearing surface here for the rods. You have tremendous bearing surfaces just inside of that for the secondary crank. Okay, and then you've got secondary crank bearings here, primary crank bearings here, secondary rod throw bearings here, primary rod throw bearings here, and they're stacked. You just got total control of your bearings, and you can lube it from the inside just like you do a conventional engine. You can pump oil through here. You could probably even seal this to some degree and have pressure coming all the way out, you know, to the rod throw, not just ambient oil flow, but pressurized flow all through these 2 gears that's inside, which I'll show you in a minute, and then all the way out to the rod bearings. So it looks like bearing-wise, it's to me it has a lot of. We should have a long service life. Okay, we're going to start tearing this down, and I'm just going to take off some of the ancillary things. This little power motor at this end. I'll just pull this handle off here. This is kind of one of the nice parts, I think, about it is, you know, and some of these bolts are, I never did cut them off. So it takes a while to run the threads down, but you can see how easy this comes apart here in a minute. Now let's pop this dial indicator off. bolt's kind of hard to get out because of a kind of a tight space there, but basically that's the part now. Let me just scoot this out of the way so I've got a little more working room here. I'm going to lay this up here so we don't get grease on the table too much. Now then, this is just bearing just slides off. This bearing slides off. Now we're going to take this bolt out right here. Now then, I'll just turn this around so you can see it. This mechanism slides off here. This is just a keeper. This bolt just goes through there. This is your rod throw that comes out. There's a spacer that just fell on the floor. That's it. There's the collar that rides within this collar. Like that. This is kind of dual or triple purpose right here. This collar, it serves as a bearing, a secondary bearing, a positioner, the major throw and the minor throw of the two rod surfaces, all right there. So it's kind of neat. And then here's your crankshaft coming right on through, and here's the gear that drives this gear. So this is your primary rod throw, and it's just fastened to this one over here, but it is not fastened to this rod. It rotates freely, and this rod, this control crank right here, it rotates freely through there, right through here. So you can see it'll just spin. Well, it spins freely. Here it is. That's all of it. That easy and that simple.